My name is Matthew Reinbold. I am very pleased to be here. I am very grateful for a technology like this that allows us to have these kind of conversations, regardless of whatever kind of crazy happenstance happens to be going on in the world. And today, as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the 7 skills to change complex systems and save your software. So first off, I think we need to talk about how we rethink the relationships. Before we get to the 7 skills, we need to actually talk about what happens with change in a complex system and why it's seemingly so hard, especially in these modern times, to facilitate some kind of large scale improvement program within software. And when I say improvement program, this could be a variety of different things. This could be becoming more customer centric. It could be improving the agile processes. It could be improving your security posture. Whatever that thing is, whatever that big change initiative might be within your company, chances are you've probably found it like moving through molasses. It's difficult. It's hard. New things pop up that you probably didn't even consider at the start of your change initiative, and ultimately it threatens to undo all the positive progress that you've made thus far. So we're going to briefly start out talking about why that is, and then we're going to talk about the skills that you need to have to make that ultimately successful. We're going to start with a gross oversimplification of the way things used to be. We're going to look back at the past with rose tinted glasses. And we're going to say that once upon a time, the software that a company was responsible for could be thought of as a single unit. This is not a perfect metaphor, but it's useful in this particular case. We'll say that there was a single team working on a single code base, and everybody was working toward the same release date. And then when it was time to publish, there was a grand celebration. Everybody took a well-deserved rest, and then they were back on the next release. So in my 20 plus years of professional experience, I used to live in that world. I used to help contribute to the gold master, which for those that have been in software a little bit less, that's the pressed disc of software. And you could stamp that out and say, you are done. That same concept of done for a holistic software capability simply doesn't exist for a vast majority of software developers today. I've seen firsthand how software development has changed. In my day job as a digital engagement lead for Concentrix Catalyst, I work with enterprises on how to create their digital transformation efforts. And I know that this model on the screen is not how their internal operations currently look. Their internal operations are actually much more like this, where we might have had a singular monolith, both in concept, in team resourcing, in deployment, in language, in framework, and even in objective. Today's software capabilities much more look like some abstract art. This is a network traffic map from a UK company called Monzo. This was even back in 2019, so it's actually probably more sophisticated now. But what this is the network traffic between their 1,500 different microservices. Rather than having a single monolith, they have 1,500 tiny individual pieces that make up the capability that they ultimately deliver to their customers. And Monzo is not alone. These ominous charts are called microservice Death Stars. And similar charts exist for Netflix and Amazon and Twitter, and probably in some degree the company that you work at. You're probably not trying to manage 1,500 different microservices at the moment, but odds are that software capabilities that you're attempting to deliver are comprised of multiple pieces. So maybe that's not APIs, maybe those are modules, maybe those are libraries, maybe those are NPM pieces, whatever. the software that you deliver is not entirely a monolith anymore. There's connections to other things. And this is because it's responding to greater calls to do greater things. It's incredibly difficult for one person or even one team to comprehend the entire software scope. And so, rightly, we've developed reductive techniques for turning a large problem into smaller chunks. If you think about what we do when we talk about modern software, we're talking about various ways of reducing the problem set. Agile is a reduction in the size of work to be delivered. Continuous integration and continuous delivery is about reducing the time it takes to deliver. Even the concept of a two-piece team is about reducing the scope of ownership to something that isn't swamped by network communication overhead. This has been a boon for individual units. And it's also subsequently why the modern enterprise is no longer a single blob of software, but a complex, interconnected, distributed system. Coordination avoidance through this reductionism has been the primary mechanism that we've attempted to scale the systems. However, that does lead to some interesting byproducts where each one of these tiny subsystems now has the opportunity to go and become disambiguated, uncoordinated, each working toward its local optimized maxima. So in this representation here, maybe some group is trying to upgrade to a new dependency version, while another one is responding to an audit request. Maybe one group is cleansing data for a machine learning initiative, while another is working on a performance improvement. And my favorite, possibly one of these groups, is rewriting their entire code base in the latest framework mentioned on Hacker News because it looks cool. All of these are valid, with possibly the exception of the last one. But what happens is that the system no longer has coherence. Each one of these groups, because of the lack of visibility into other parts of the system, they're now taking their own direction on what they think is best. And there's no great understanding of the whole anymore. This becomes a type of conceptual debt for the system. Autonomy on its own is insufficient to address the incoherence penalty. For companies to benefit from faster, better decision-making on the part of their autonomous teams, those decisions need to be aligned. The hardest part of modern software development has less to do with the technology itself and much more to do with maintaining coherence across the parts. Michael Nygaard is an author and frequent speaker on software development, and he defined the incoherence penalty as whatever time the team members spend reestablishing a common view of the universe. Now, if you have a small team, reestablishing this common view of the universe can be straightforward. Just a single whiteboard session every couple of weeks is probably sufficient. However, as we scale, as our software needs to do, the system becomes more complex, and the effort necessary to maintain alignment across the pieces grows. In a complex system, the power is the relationship between the pieces and the places where these things interact. With dynamic systems, these are the API interfaces. When we diagram these things, it's almost always in terms of the technology. We go in hoping that we'll get the correct architectural configuration, or we'll identify the tooling that will provide the silver bullet to our incoherence problem. And this is unfortunate because that technical system exists within a human system. And that human system, because we're not graphing it, we're not paying attention to it, it goes underserved. And ultimately, it's the connection between the humans that's another extremely significant source of the relationships within the organization. If we're going to change software, if we're going to create change that is necessary across the holistic system, We need to apply skills to the human relationships equally, if not more, than the energy we expend on the software integrations. Technology does not create alignment. People do. Autonomy and alignment are not opposing ends of the spectrum, but they are complementary. The more alignment that you have, the more autonomy can be supported. We can be assured that the decisions that are made will move the organization in the same direction, not pull it apart. So that's why we have to have these 7 skills for addressing the humans behind these complex systems. So now this can be rather complex. There's a tremendous amount of stuff here, and I only have about 20 minutes left. So when I talk about each one of these skills, let's treat these as a reference, an opportunity to explore these other areas. And hopefully I'll provide some links, and I'll provide some books where you can go and explore more. This shouldn't be treated as the end-all be-all coverage of every single one of these complex areas. But as a jumping off point, hopefully we can cover that in the next 20 minutes or so. Let's first talk about creating a compelling vision. As you might imagine, just having an idea for how something could be better is not the same as creating a vision. If all success needed was a good idea, then my domain name registrations would have made me rich a long time ago. It takes work to go from an idea of what to do to a vision that actually rallies others to a cause. I really enjoy the tactile presentation of getting to a vision that's presented in Mike Burrow's book, Agenda Shift. He starts out with this concept of the celebration. So perhaps in my organization, I might say, I wish we had everybody on the same gateway. Like, that's my big idea. Well, going through this exercise called the celebration, we need to reframe that, because in my head, I've already picked a solution. I've already said, I want this external vendor and I want everybody to be on it. But that's not really an outcome. That's not quantified in terms of the business value to be delivered. It's already assuming a solution. So by following this exercise called the celebration, thinking ahead to the future, defining what we're actually celebrating, who's in the room, why are we celebrating, where is this at, so on and so forth. What I'm doing is I'm unpacking this preconceived notion of everybody on a single vendor. And I'm actually looking at, how is this improving people's lives? Mike also defines this other exercise called the 15-minute photo, which does this really powerful thing. In defining the celebration, we also have to define the obstacles. Well, what is keeping us from getting to this promised land, this wonderful celebration of an achievement? Well, this obstacle that I'm writing down, more likely than not, probably includes a lot of things that are absences. So for example, I might say, well, one of the things that I wish we could change about our organization is that we don't have meaningful postmortems. That's an absence of something. And again, that absence assumes a solution. It assumes that postmortems should be done, but it doesn't necessarily define the outcomes that we're trying to create. So rather than going through, because of this exercise, and saying, oh, well, we don't have postmortems, let's implement postmortems, you reframe it and you say, well, I think we need to incorporate learnings more regularly. That's an actual outcome. Now we can go in and we can look at things as far as like, how do we go ahead and make that possible, make that outcome more tangible? Chances are there's probably more than just postmortems that could be incorporated there. And also, maybe the reason that somebody is suggesting postmortems is not because they want to incorporate learnings. Maybe they wish they had a more definitive milestone when a project was done. Maybe there's a current backlog that just keep cycling and going, and they feel like they're in a never-ending grind. And perhaps, as they had with the previous company, postmortems would be some kind of signal that they're done. So in reframing things, as recasting these things, you actually unpack these obstacles and you get at the heart of what people actually want. That's very important for creating a compelling vision. Once you have these things, once you have what you're trying to accomplish in the terms of outcomes, and you've defined the obstacles in a way that is open and takes advantage of a variety of different solution paths, then you can go ahead and create your compelling story. Your compelling story should have some kind of clear articulation of the current state. And what is so important about this clear articulation is why the current state is unsustainable, why people should change. Your organization is not greenfield. It didn't just happen last night. People have been able to get work done. What is it about your idea that should cause them to change now? As I work with companies, this is a huge thing that we spend a tremendous amount of time on. But what is the source of urgency? In some cases, there's a pending bankruptcy, or maybe there was a very embarrassing security breach that causes that urgency. But in a vast majority of cases, somebody has a great idea. They just need to convince people that are already doing work why that should change. Now, there are ways of doing that and connecting a compelling reason, but there needs to be a sense of urgency, not panic, urgency to why the change should happen now. And then painting an attractive, plausible future, creating a new identity for participants, and a path to connect it all together. These are all vital pieces of the vision that go beyond just a single idea, go beyond just, hey, let's be more customer centric. And it turns it into something live and viable, which is going to be necessary in order to build coalitions. Our second skill. Major change is difficult to accomplish, and no individual, no matter how charismatic, can develop the perfect vision, communicate it to everyone, eliminate all obstacles, perform all experiments, and tally the short-term wins. What you need is a coalition able to shoulder the load and recruit new help as the effort grows. One of the most important aspects of coalition building is you're attempting to provide inclusion, but not assimilation. You're not the Borg. You should be able to elevate the unique skills, experiences, and desires of the participating members. And while belonging is important to sustaining a movement through difficult times, members should still feel uniquely valued. And I will say, in the building of the coalition, the vision is probably going to change because they're going to be bringing their own ideas, their own assumptions, their own experiences, their own preferences. The sign of a healthy coalition is if it's evolving and changing and adapting. It's not rigid. It's not fixed. There's a variety of different examples of getting people involved. Your coalition building should be so much more than please read this blog post or please attend this meeting. Those are not compelling calls to action. There are a variety of different types of activities that can be made, and you should be thinking about different inclusion points or on-ramps for people that accommodate a variety of different time availabilities and skill levels. The book, More Fearless Change, is kind of a quirky book. You don't read it from beginning to end. It is a cookbook of different things to try. And they start from very simple little, please come and vote in this standards discussion, clear up to let's hold an internal developer conference. You may not be able to go and hit that developer conference at the beginning of your change effort, but the important thing is accommodating and allowing for people to engage with your effort as they are able. And once you start doing that, you need to start thinking about how to move people from just mobilizing to organizing. So mobilizing is relatively straightforward. People offer to help and you give them a task to do. So this is really straightforward. And if you are on social media, you're very familiar with the kind of retweet if you agree. Very low ask, people fire it off and it's done. And while that's cheap and easy to do, the amount of actual impact that has is very low. For an internal company thing, that might be, hey, read this blog post on the internal CMS, or hey, please take a look at our new website that we just launched for our coalition. Yes, these things are important, but they're not going to create the kind of sustainable change effort that you expect. You need to be moving people to the organizational side of the movement. Organizing for change is about identifying, recruiting, and developing people with whom we share a common purpose. As we're identifying and including them and getting them engaged, they'll express a responsibility to each other. So right now, if you have an internal change effort and you have people volunteering to help out, ask yourself, if you had to pay dues, would these people still be there? Chances are probably not. That's a very weak coalition. However, as you begin to develop a sense of responsibility to both the idea and each other, you start seeing people take on this extra identity, an extra responsibility, an extra compulsion to help each other and continue to move this along. And that is the transformative power that helps make and sustain change. So a major task of the coalition building is moving people who are already concerned about the issue and willing to do something through this organizing side, which deepens the participants' understanding of who they are and why they want to make the change, so that they can identify others who share their values and help build that change. So obviously that includes a lot of communication. Now, when I say communication, I don't mean standing on the top of your building with a bullhorn and telling people about your awesome idea. When I talk about communicating, I'm saying that people don't need a good talking to make change. They need a good listening to. Everyone wants to be more successful, more efficient, more capable, but they also want to retain their autonomy. Just telling people what to do rarely works. I absolutely understand that I should eat healthier, but I still bristle whenever my wife brings it up. It's just the way it is. More often than not, if communicating comes across as a command or an edict, it's going to create resistance. So we have to change how we communicate. Much of our daily conversation is just a default activity. It just kind of happens. By contrast, strategic conversations are the deliberate use of limited time and attention with another person to achieve a specific goal. In our case, our goal is about furthering our change initiative. Excuse me. Motivational interviewing is a fascinating technique designed to strengthen the personal motivation for and commitment to a specific goal. And it does it by eliciting and exploring a person's own values and beliefs within the atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. So rather than charging into a forum and say, hey, everybody, listen to my idea, it's starting with asking open questions about how the person is doing. Why did they join the company? What is it about the company that they really enjoy? What are the recent accomplishments that they're super proud of? And through that, by listening to that, you get an understanding of the things that they value, the things that they find important. And so then you affirm the strengths of their own belief system that happen to align with the kind of change that you're trying to do. If the person expresses that it's very important for them that something is customer centric, then you reinforce that and say, I hear what you're saying. And we happen to be working on a new research initiative that attempts to close that gap between what we're doing, what the customers actually think. And then applying reflective listening, reflecting back to the person the kind of attributes that would allow them to see the helpfulness, the worthiness of the change that you're talking about, and how that change is actually already aligned with the things they believe or want to have happen. And then summarizing is extremely important, helping connect the dots for them between the things that they already believe and find valuable and want to accomplish in their own careers and their own team work with the things that you are trying to make happen within the organization. Again, all to try and get that common alignment across our complex human system. And you bring swag. This is a picture of my laptop, and as you can see, I've been part of a few different efforts. But the more abstract in concept your thing is, the more helpful it is to have some kind of physical representation for that thing. And it doesn't have to be just stickers. It can be challenge coins, pins, posters, etc. What you pick is ultimately dependent on the culture and what kind of currencies are exchanged. But bottom line, have something that represents this mission that can extend and communicate change well after you are already gone, and then end your conversation with a call to action. In the previous step about coalition building and how we create these on-ramps, there's a variety of different activities. After listening to the values and beliefs and time availability, have something that allows this person to get connected in a meaningful way into the change effort. I'm watching the time here. I know we need to be moving here, so I'm going to try and hustle through these last set of items. Be able to run experiments. We need to be able to understand more about what is required, and we need to be able to adapt and adjust based on what we learned. Too often we think of a great change as requiring a discrete, atomic, massive event to stand out in the fork in the road. When we talk about making a company agile or improving security, those are huge things. And as you might imagine, trying to do that huge thing all at once is going to generate a proportional amount of resistance. I don't have time for that. My backlog is twice as long. I can't accommodate that huge change right now. So we take that and we break it down into a series of smaller, more accommodating experiments. We need to shrink the change that we're asking for, and we need to run several simultaneous experiments and then use those learnings to make subsequent experiments more powerful. Because during our vision step, we've reframed our obstacles and we're looking for outcomes. We know that there might be a host of things that we can do. And because we've created the coalition, we now have people in a position to try different things and report back. This experimentation skill is how we engage those groups, gather the results, and continue to create an engine of interesting revelations that we incorporate into a virtuous feedback cycle. So basically, small experiments equal less resistance. We always need to understand and consider how we make an experiment safer. If an experiment is too big to fail, it's no longer an experiment. And that becomes very, very, very scary for your leadership team to back and rally behind. But if you're just trying some stuff out and it's easy to say yes to, that is a wonderful opportunity to learn and to build momentum moving forward. So create those short-term wins. Valuable experiments are things that are visible, they're unambiguous, and clearly relate to the change effort. The unambiguous is pretty important, and actually an area where you probably are going to spend a fair amount of time thinking about. Because if you perform an experiment and at the end of it, there's 6 or 7 different variables that might have impacted that, and you're not entirely sure which one actually contributed, that's no longer unambiguous. And your detractors, your skeptics, are going to tease that out, and the ultimate ability for you to drive the change based on this experiment is undermined. So spend some time figuring out how to make your experiments visible, unambiguous, and clearly related to the kind of change that you're desiring to see. And once you have the experiment, once you have the results, you need to be able to celebrate. And much like communication, on the surface, this seems kind of odd. Obviously, everybody knows how to celebrate, right? You put the lampshade on your head and you put the toga on and you go dancing. That's not the kind of celebration that I'm talking about. In the business sense, we're talking about how do we actually take these meaningful signals that we're accruing, that we're growing, this momentum that we're harnessing, and get it back out in front of people. Most of us don't have a plan for how we celebrate accomplishments. And what's more, after 2.5 years of remote work and pandemic isolation, the kind of regular signals that we used to have with our coworkers are no longer there. Celebration is an important opportunity to cement the lessons learned and strengthen the relationships between people that make future achievement possible. Change and growth are promoted through positive emotions more than disciplined practice, and celebrating small wins reinforces that learning experience. So within your companies, there's guaranteed to be a variety of different kinds of recognition programs. There might be that yearly dinner with the CEO for the people that were nominated and selected for extraordinary effort. That happens to be this formal type of program at the top of the pyramid. And while those are nice, they really only impact maybe 1 to 10% of the employees at any given company. And then there's the informal programs where you can give people kudos or maybe send them a gift card. That might be monthly or quarterly if people remember to do it. And maybe that gets between 1/3 and half of the employees. What I'm interested in when I'm talking about celebrating wins, I'm talking about everyday recognition of people doing the behavior, making the change happen. So just as this accomplishments we celebrate don't have to be large, our celebrations don't have to be grandiose. They just need to be meaningful. Everyday recognition is about expressing thanks to the people and acknowledging others for doing the hard everyday work. It should be, if not daily, then weekly is okay. And in previous roles, I had a calendar invite set up that once a week I would go through and I would identify the people that had contributed, and that contribution might have been simply following the API standards as expected. It might have been reaching out and asking a really intelligent question. It might have been coming to the end of their journey and having their big launch. Regardless of what it was, I made sure that I spent some of my time writing about how grateful I was for what they were doing and how awesome it was that they had accomplished the thing that they had accomplished. And this thing happened to be in a system where their manager also saw it. So it wasn't just communicating to the individual that they were performing the behavior that we needed to see to change the organization, but then their manager was also getting a signal. And if you work in a company with a performance recognition program where maybe once or twice a year you're having to go and justify what you've done, these things become currency. I'm not saying don't abuse this. Make sure that this is authentic communication. But how many times do people go out of their way to actually write a nice note for somebody? Hardly ever. Use that, embrace that, become the person of gratitude. And then what you are doing is you are empowering them to then take that currency and spend it down the road in their review, in their one-on-ones. That is a powerful, powerful way of moving an organization if done on a regular, everyday basis. Now, just saying good job might seem like it's going to get a little old. And yes, you still want this to be authentic communication, but there's a variety of different ways of framing it. BJ Fogg has a book called Tiny Habits. He has, through his research with people, identified that different people respond to different messages. Use this. Spend some time. Think about these messages that you're sending out, this everyday reinforcement, this everyday celebration of the good behaviors in the system. And after a little work, this becomes second nature. We're getting there, folks. We're getting there. I warned you that the timing might be off on this, but we're almost there. Skill number 6 is empowering others. So whenever you let up before a job is done, critical momentum is lost and regression may follow. And in successful transformation, the guiding coalition uses the credibility afforded by the short-term wins to push forward faster, taking on even more or bigger projects. It's absolutely incumbent to realize that not everybody embraces change in the same degree. There's what's called an innovation distribution curve, where you will have people that rush into any kind of brand new change effort, but then there's percentages of the population, like within a company, that just don't embrace it in the same way. Realizing this, you can generate the correct materials, the correct approaches for those different groups. Don't treat the entire population the same. Different people at different spots in that innovation curve will require different things. So in order to support them, support their needs, recognize where they are on their journey and make sure that you're meeting them at that spot. All right, so let's get to skill number 7, terraforming the culture. New practices, if they are to continue beyond the effort of the guiding coalition, need to grow deep roots. Without them, when the transformation program or initiative stops working day and night, the existing cultural norms will reassert themselves. Shallow roots will require constant watering, and without the attention, the practices will dry up, wither, and die. When the new practices made in a transformation effort are not compatible with the relevant cultures, they will always be subject to regression. So, the final stage in changing a complex system is terraforming the culture to make the change last. Now, for those familiar with the API space, you're probably familiar with the concept of Conway's law. You may also be familiar with the concept of the reverse or inverse Conway maneuver. In both the reverse or inverse Conway maneuver, the idea is that you redesign your organization to produce the kind of software you want. It is a powerful idea, but that's not where you should start your change initiative. There is no magic wand to allow you to come in and say, boop, you're now a small distributed team. Go figure it out. That is a recipe for chaos. Anybody who's lived through their share of enterprise reorgs know that just reforming things and magically having something come out the other side is a recipe for chaos. That's why I propose these other 6 skills first, before you then go and start tackling things like how you interview and whether you're interviewing for people that are more aware and engaged in the kind of change that you want to perform. Before you go and start changing your onboarding process, before you start going and changing how you reward and your operations for how you look and consider candidates. Those things are powerful. Those things are how you embed your change in the final culture, but they should not be taken on before you've actually developed the kind of vision, the kind of coalitions, before you've done your experimentation to make sure you know what you're talking about, before you've celebrated the wins and communicated this thing out. All of those steps prepare the soil for this final stage, looking at your processes, embedding the change within those systems, and then coming to the ultimate kind of sustainable state for your organization. So let's talk about next steps very briefly. This second, everybody on this call, think about the one thing that you want to change in your organization. Nothing is perfect. Everything can be better. What's the first thing that comes to mind? Write it down. That's the first thing. And then this week, whether it's through Slack or Teams or in an email or your corporate HR system, send a note of gratitude to someone that you've seen handle this problem or done this thing well. It doesn't need to be Shakespeare, just a couple sentences. Hey, Tim, I really wanted to let you know I was impressed with how you kept your test suite up to date, for example. The goal is not to solve things for all time. The goal is just to set up a practice of reinforcing positive behavior and building a connection to people that you may not talk with every single day. And then sometime in the next week, schedule a chat with that person and explore the problem, explore the possible change, and begin to gather information for how to take the next steps. That's a challenge for you. I hope you accept it. We can all do better. Thank you for your attention. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Matthew. That was really exciting. I did prompt people to ask some questions, but I don't think we have any from the audience yet.
Not yet. So I think it's up to us, Marc.
I'll maybe start with one. So early on, you were talking about how each business functions pursuing their own local goals is a major source of incoherence in organizations. Often the reason why they're pursuing their own goals is also because individuals have been given performance targets, or they have their own ambitions inside the organization. Have you come across any means of how to deal with that?
If the organization performance targets are not aligned, at that point, there needs to be some conversations with leadership. If individuals are allowed to set their OKRs, and those OKRs don't connect to any kind of meaningful higher level objectives, if there's KPIs that are allowed to persist that frankly become vanity metrics and there's no leadership that connects those things together into a meaningful direction, there needs to be some conversations to be had there. Now, if you have the hierarchical power, that is something that can be done. If you don't have the hierarchical power, then there's a conversation of influence, much akin to the 7 skills that I talked about, that needs to happen. Our KPIs are this, your KPIs are that. Where is that driving us as an organization? Are we going this way, or are we coming together in some kind of coherent direction? And unpacking that and trying to come up with some kind of solution. You're not going to be able to solve it for all people at all times, but having the conversation with the nearest neighbors and exposing this, highlighting this, I think would be the first step in trying to debug things.
We have a 2 questions from the audience. It's the internal audience, but still it's the audience because they're not on stage. First question from Claudia is, you recommended multiple books. Which one would you suggest to start with?
Oh boy. Okay, here we go. No, I'm not going to throw all these at you because I do absolutely realize people are busy. If I had one to start, it's the one I didn't grab. I would start with the OG. I think this is probably mirrored for folks. Unfortunately, I can't unmirror this on the forum, but it's Leading Change by Cotter, one of the 25 best business books of all time. This is the updated version. This provides a fantastic buffet, high level start. I mentioned Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. When you're ready to dive into the actual how to change the habits, how to change the environment, this is a great one. The Switch by the Heath brothers. It's a bit more out there, but it also talks so much about appealing to the emotional side, not just the analytical side, which as a technologist really was useful for me. It's not just all about logical arguments. There's got to be some heat there. I really appreciated that. I mentioned Agenda Shift by Marc Burgauer. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks. We also have a question from Laura. Any suggestion on overcoming the appreciative message is manipulative and judgmental trap? I'll keep, if it's okay, Laura, that I shorten the question to this. Yeah. We talked about that in the podcast too. So
I am fascinated that this question is so prevalent. That in order to engage with other people, we're trying to get one over on them. I get that sentiment. I get that if I am coming with an agenda, that I'm trying to Jedi mind trick you into doing something against your will. And I will say absolutely positively that if you're trying to trick people, you're not engaging with them as peers. And that's bordering on sociopathic behavior. So you should not be manipulating people. As I talked about in the communication piece, this is about engaging in authentic, real understanding, empathetic understanding. This is not you enforcing an agenda on somebody, but you willing to reach across a silo and figure out what people are interested in. And in the process, being vulnerable and allowing yourself to possibly change too. So when I talk about these change efforts, I'm not talking about a Machiavellian checklist of things to deploy to gain power. What I'm talking about is repairing our relationship system and learning how to engage with other individuals on an equal level. And yes, I might have some ideas. I might have a change that I'd like to see, but I want to go there with you. I want to create this relationship, this bond, and ultimately arrive at a better place for that. So, yes, don't manipulate people. This is about upskilling yourself and becoming a better person in the process.